Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's homework video. We are still in Unit 4. We're talking about macroeconomics, big economics. So take a look at our standard down there. Identify and explain broad economics goals. So this is a very broad and general standard, and it wants us to talk about economic goals. So we're going to be working with this standard for several days in class, and there's going to be several homework videos around this one particular standard. So economic goals, keep that in mind. One of the goals of our economy is to have a strong economy. And how do you measure that? Alright, so our LEQ is as follows. What four categories of economic activity are used to measure GDP? Now pause for a second. If you have been alive in America the past 5 years and not lived under a rock, you've probably heard the phrase GDP thrown around quite a bit. Well, it's time for you guys to figure out what that actually means. So before we get into GDP, what I want to show you guys is a quick refresher on the business cycle, because the two are interrelated. Now if you take a look at the y-axis of this business cycle graph, how are we measuring the performance of the economy? We are measuring it through GDP. Alright, so what does GDP stand for? GDP is an acronym that stands for Gross Domestic Product. So when we have crazy sounding phrases like this, I like to break it down on a word by word basis. So gross by itself, we're not referring to the ew, that's gross. Gross means the total sum, like gross profit, gross income, gross revenue. That just means the total sum. Domestic means within the United States. So domestic issues are issues within the United States. Contrast that with international. Domestic means within the United States. And then product is quite simply the end result. So here is the definition of GDP. And the definition is actually very simple. GDP is the total dollar value of all final, that word final is bolded for a reason, of all final goods and services produced in a nation in a single year. That's it. If the United States were to sell off everything it produced in 1 year, that's the GDP. Now what I want you guys to understand is that there are several ways to measure a nation's economic performance. Keep in mind our standard, identify broad economic goals. So one of the economic goals of the nation is simply to have a strong economy. Now there are many ways to measure the strength of economy, and GDP is by far and by large the most powerful indicator of economic performance. It's the most cited measurement of economic performance. Now, GDP is always reported in dollar amounts. Now, in 2014, the GDP for the United States was about $18 trillion. Do you guys understand why it's called macroeconomics now? Amazon, Google, Walmart, if you combined them, Bill Gates, all the richest people in the world would not even come close to touching that number. So to put it in another perspective, the United States by itself, now there's, depending on who you ask, there's about 250-ish different countries in the world. Out of all those countries in the world, the United States is responsible for 23%. That's almost 1/4 of world GDP. So when it comes to gross domestic product, the United States owns all, including China. But once again, there's other ways to measure economic performance. The United States wins at GDP. Some other areas of economic performance, some other indicators, we don't do so hot. So this is just a graph I want to show you guys to give you a feel for what we're looking at. In 2014, these are the top 10 countries measured by GDP. Now, once again, I did not say the top 10 strongest economies. To measure a strong economy, you have to consider things like inflation, purchasing power, unemployment. These are things we have not yet covered. But if you just look at GDP, GDP is certainly a strong indicator. It's the most heavily used one, but it's not the only indicator. So looking at just GDP, the United States is up there, followed by China, so on and so forth. So these are the 10 most productive countries according to GDP, if you will. Furthermore, let's take a look at GDP over time. So this graph starts in 1929 and it ends right here at 2000 and about 2013, 2014 or so. Now, if you guys take a note, over the course of time, including the ups and downs, GDP is increasing. So take a look at this graph right here. This looks like the early 1940s. During the 1940s, we had a huge economic boom, the post-World War II boom, the baby boom generation. Things went great for a good period of time. Now, take a look way over here. We're right at about 2008, 2009. What happened in 2008, 2009? A recession. So even though we went through a recession, overall GDP performance has increased. Now I want you guys to take a look at this graph and compare it to the business cycle graph. So here's the business cycle graph, and doesn't that look fairly similar to GDP? So this black line right here, I didn't explain that in the business cycle video, but this black line represents the actual growth trend, aka GDP. So when you're looking at GDP, there are good times and bad times, even though GDP is rising. So remember that GDP is related to the business cycle and vice versa. Okay, so I need to spend some more time talking about that final word that I bolded. So take a look at the definition of GDP. So here's what final means. As economists, we have to be very specific about what's actually being measured. That means we only add up the dollar value of final goods and services to avoid double counting. For example, think of a computer tower, so a laptop if you will, or an actual desktop computer. It's made up of memory cards, video cards, motherboard, screws, plastic, silicone, so on and so forth. Now even though the company, say Dell or Apple, had to purchase those products individually, those individual products are not counted in GDP, and here's why. What is counted in GDP is the sale of the final price to the buyer is counted. So even though that motherboard may have cost Dell $200 and that memory card may have cost Dell $25, those numbers are not counted in GDP. Remember, GDP is the value of the final goods and services produced. So if this computer is assembled, and let's say it cost Dell, I don't know, $600 to make it, but they want to sell it to the consumer for $800, that $800 is what's counted for GDP. Now keep in mind, only new goods and services are counted in GDP. That means selling a used car or buying a used car does not count because that car's final product was already counted the year it was produced. However, one caveat to that, if you buy a new battery from Walmart or Advanced Auto Parts and put that new battery in a used car, the new battery, say it's $70, $80, that will count towards our GDP. Now it's time to look at how GDP is actually calculated. Do not be intimidated by this formula. GDP is simply one big addition problem with a little subtraction. Now in part 2 of this video series, we are going to break these down part by part. Well, it's time to wrap it up. I just wanted to give you guys a quick introduction overview to GDP. Once again, this is the first part of a multi-part video series on GDP, but this was a darn good introduction to it. So GDP is the total dollar value of all final goods and services produced in a nation a single year. And there is the formula for calculating GDP, which we will be discussing in part 2 of this video series. I appreciate your time as always. Those of you that take the time to watch these videos, I think very highly of you, and thank you for your efforts. Have a great